Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, the podcast where we explore soilless growing systems, specialised crops, and the science behind modern horticulture. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and today's episode we are delving into the unique and captivating topic of cultivating carnivorous plants. Not one for vegan plants or vegetarian plants this time. So, carnivorous plants, they're botanical curiosities that fascinated scientists and gardeners for centuries, not only for their exotic appearance, but also for their remarkable adaptations. Today we'll examine how they work, how to grow them, and whether hydroponics can support these extraordinary plants. So are these a plant that can be used in hydroponics? So carnivorous plants are species that have evolved to derive their nutrients, or some of their nutrients, particularly nitrogen, from trapping and digesting insects and other small organisms. Why do they do this? Well, they typically inhabit nutrient-poor environments, especially bogs, but also sandy wetlands as well. So they're the two environments where you're going to find them: acidic bogs and sandy wetlands. And so if you're going to grow them hydroponically, you're probably going to need to mimic those conditions. So traditional root-based nutrient uptake is inefficient. Famous examples of carnivorous plants. Well, the most famous one is the Venus flytrap, Dionaea muscipula. That's a difficult scientific name, that. Then we've got the pitcher plants, which are probably the second most famous. And then you've got the Nepenthes, which I think are from Asia, and the Sarracenia, which I think are from America. And you'll find that the Asian pitcher plants, their pitchers are on the end of the leaves, and that's how they've evolved. It's sort of like a modified leaf. Whereas the American pitcher plants, they are from the rosette of flowers. They're not from the end of the leaves. And they're actually unrelated. And it's a biological evolutionary mechanism called convergent evolution, where they've evolved separately in similar environments to have the same feature, even though they're completely unrelated. So that is clearly the best option in that situation, is to have a pitcher and develop it. And it's not like they can look at the alternative plant and say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll copy that. They're a completely other side of the world. They're non-thinking plants. And so that's quite an amazing thing about evolution, is that they've evolved the same mechanism. And we know that they're in completely different ways because their genetics is different, and the way they actually grow, one from the leaf and one from the rosette, is completely different. So that's pitcher plants. That's one example of convergent evolution, or similar to parallel evolution. Another one is cactuses and euphorbias. And a lot of euphorbias look like cactuses. And you might think, oh, they're the same. But actually, if you study them, you'll find that there's different ways they look different, and their biology is very different. Euphorbias are from Africa, and obviously cacti are from the Americas. Back to carnivorous plants. The third most famous are the sundews. These are ones that have got little sort of trichome spikes, gluey spikes that trap any insect that lands on them, and then the leaf folds over. And then the butterworts, or pinguiculas, and these have just got sticky leaves. And then we sort of have hemi-carnivorous plants, or semi-carnivorous plants, where insects sort of get stuck to them, and they don't produce enzymes, but they sort of, scientists believe they might derive some nitrogen from just the fact that because they're sticky and plants get attached to them. I think things like teasel are classed as semi-carnivorous. So despite them dramatic mechanisms like snapping traps in the Venus flytrap, sticky tentacles and pitchers, carnivorous plants still rely on photosynthesis for their energy, and they require moisture through their roots. So they're not parasitic. They're not getting all their nutrients. It's not like a lion or a tiger that's carnivorous. They're still getting their actual energy from photosynthesis. They're just getting nitrogen mainly from the animal that they trap. Well, what environmental conditions do they require if you're going to grow them? Well, obviously they're going to need water, and they require pure mineral-free water, not tap water. If you're going to make sure you've got a good dechlorinator, like Dr. Hydro dechlorinator, ideally rainwater distilled, reverse osmosis, or one that's has its minerals removed. Light. Most species thrive in bright, indirect sunlight under full spectrum grow lights with a high UVA light output. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary there. I mean, bogs and wetlands, they're going to be fairly high light levels. These are not shade-loving plants mostly. You don't find many on the forest floor. Humidity, many species like Nepenthes pitchers and Drosera prefer high humidity, often above 60 degrees. And the soil, while not soilless by nature, they grow in inert acidic media, such as sphagnum moss, perlite or silica sand. And nutrient-rich soils would be harmful to them, so don't grow them in anything with a really high EC fertilizer rate. So that's one of the reasons why I think the RHS or Kew Gardens, they tried to ban peat-based grow media, but they still use peat, especially at Kew. That certainly used to be the case. They use peat especially for acidic-loving carnivorous plants because that's their natural environment and they just couldn't grow them without them. So the real question, can carnivorous plants be grown hydroponically? Well, the short answer is partially. While true hydroponic cultivation, sort of a water-based system with dissolved nutrients, sort of DWC, NFT, is generally not recommended. But semi-hydroponic inert media setups can work well. So passive wick or tray system, many growers use a simple tray filled with RO water. Passive systems like Autopot would work well with this. The inert media is sort of like sphagnum moss rather than cocoa, perlite. These substances hold water without releasing nutrients, making them ideal for carnivorous plants. Some things like the pitchers from Asia, they can grow well in leca, that sort of volcanic or expanded clay aggregate. And just make sure the nutrient levels are kept really, really low. Don't use a really high nutrient level. Certainly don't use anything really high in nitrogen. So don't use your standard hydroponic nutrients. They're extremely sensitive to high EC values as well as just high nitrogen levels. You can give them foliar treatments. However, you're probably best just to feed them insects. Dry bloodworms are obviously a great example, and just foliar sprays at very, very dilute levels. We said that the Venus flytrap is a very common species. It does require a dormant period in the winter and bright light during the summer. I've tried to buy some Venus flytraps here in the UK and they're only available for sale for a few months of the year because they can't guarantee they'll survive if they ship them out anytime. Cape sundews are another very common one. They look very pretty, look great on photographs, very adaptable, excellent for beginners. And then the best pitcher plant for beginners and indoor grows is Nepenthes alata. And then for the American one, Sarracenia purpura. So they're available from specialist nurseries and they'll come with specialist care instructions. So just make sure you follow them to the letter. So tips for success: always use mineral-free water, strong lighting, keep the temperature and humidity consistent. Don't use the trigger traps on the Venus flytrap or the sundews unnecessarily without a feeding insect because that'll deplete the plant's energy. And observe the dormancy requirements, especially for temperate species. There are a number of temperate pitcher plants and obviously carnivorous plants. Okay, some other top facts. Carnivorous plants are thought to be mostly, if not all, non-mycorrhizal. So no need to add a mycorrhizal product there. And that's thought to be because the grow media is so acidic that fungi will not tolerate those conditions, and also there's no phosphate to solubilize in those sort of boggy conditions, so the mycorrhiza are not going to do their main function in them anyway, so the plants are not going to give 15% of their carbon from photosynthesis to the mycorrhiza in exchange for nothing, so they've evolved to be non-mycorrhizal. There is a bromeliad from South America called Puya chilensis, and it's purported to snare large animals, including sheep, on its stiff, spiky leaves and use the decaying carcasses as a fertilizer. However, actual evidence for this happening in real life is very limited. So, yeah, you don't see many sheep impaled on Puya chilensis in the wild. I think it's probably just more someone's imagination got away with them. There is folklore in Brazil, in the rainforest, that there is a plant that is able to a man-eating tree, but no species has ever been discovered with this sort of triffid-like ability. However, it could just be that it's just so good at ensnaring its victims that nobody has ever returned from viewing it. Isn't that a thought? Maybe there is a human-eating tree out there in the rainforest, but no one's ever successfully returned. It's that good at trapping its victims. Carnivorous plants make up only 0.2% of all plant species. So even though they're popular in horticulture, they're actually very rare in the wild. Do they hold potential for capturing and killing unwanted pest insects? Could you keep a few carnivorous plants in your grow room where you've got other crops to help control pest and disease? Or do they actually release chemicals that attract insects to their area so they can catch them? That's probably to be determined, that one. It's certain that carnivorous plants, when you look at their flowers, they always have their flowers on long spikes held a long way into the air. And that's to stop pollinators from being trapped in their actual traps. Because obviously a carnivorous plant doesn't want to eat its pollinators, because its ultimate aim is to reproduce and spread its genetic contents. Going to that pest control, there sounds a bit fanciful, but Portuguese farmers have had a history of using adhesive leaves of Portuguese sundew to catch flies in and around their crops. That species has very long leaves, up to 40 centimetres. So that's massive for a sundew. And they sort of use them, they pull them off the plant and use them sort of natural fly paper. And although this sundew species is an alpine species, it grows in the mountains, and it's frost tender, and so would need to be protected in the winter if you grew it in the UK or anywhere else, sort of temperate. There is a sundew in Australia that is reported or reputed to catch squirrels, mice, and even rabbits. So that, in theory, could be used in your home or your garden for rodent control. And then some of the pitchers in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, they produce extremely large pitchers, and they use enzymes and acids and specialist bacteria to digest the insects. So they're not just water in there. There's actually sort of like a stomach, and all the things that you would find in a human stomach are in there. And some of them can go big enough to digest frogs, birds, shrews, and again, even rats that are attracted to them, which is pretty grim, isn't it? Okay, so rather than luring rodents to their death, it's actually, they're probably actually providing a sweet nectar to lick them. And then the rodents defecate in the pitcher and exchange that for nectar. It's probably more of a mutualistic thing than the rodents are probably just getting a bit stupid and falling in, rather than the pitchers sort of evolving to catch rats. They're probably just feeding the rats, if anything. So I wouldn't be putting giant pitchers in your house or your grow room, because you're probably just going to attract rats rather than actually kill rats. And Venus flytrap has been found to catch beneficial insects as well as pests. So again, non-selective there. Butterworts, which are these sort of ones with the sticky leaves that don't actually look like carnivorous plants, they're really good at catching fungus gnats. So they're probably the best ones to grow hydroponically, because they're going to catch fungus gnats in your young developing seedlings, which are a massive problem in hydroponics. Another interesting fact about pitcher plants, they have specialist cells on the lips of the pitchers. They almost look like human lips, or I'm not going to go there. And when they're moist, these specialist cells cause the insects that are light on them to actually aquaplane off them and into the trap. So, insects are normally really good at attaching to surfaces, and a blue bottle fly can happily sort of sit on your ceiling or your walls. Well, when they land on a pitcher plant, these specialist cells, they just aquaplane off as if they're in on sort of, a lubricant straight off into the pitcher, and away they go. We have 8 species that are native to the UK that are carnivorous plants. We've got a lot of bogs in the UK because we've got a lot of rain. So that was not that surprising. And there are some aquatic underwater carnivorous plants as well, such as bladderwort, urticularia. So I said there were some plants that are considered sort of half parasitic or not really parasitic. One of them is, the technical term for that is proto-carnivorous. And one species is the common weed, shepherd's purse. And that's got the capacity to attract, catch, and digest bacteria and nematodes in the sticky mucus layer surrounding the germinating seeds. It's not actually the actual plant, it's the germinating seeds. So it's not strictly speaking carnivorous. And shepherd's purse is a weed here in the UK, but it's actually grown as a crop in China and I think in Japan as well. So yeah, proto-carnivorous plants. They've got a sticky surface which possesses enzymes that break down insect proteins, and these plants digest any material trapped in that mucilage sticky substance. And it's a source of nutrition, or it could be a source of defense. Who knows? This time of year in the UK, we get a lot of campion plants or silene, and they possess sticky stems. And again, another name for that plant is catch flies, because the stems catch the flies and they can absorb and use the proteins from the animals they get caught on. Teasel, that's another plant that grows very commonly in sort of woodlands around where I live here, and that's proto-carnivorous. And then back to the rainforest, the bromeliads, they're these plants with like a pool of water on the inside or rosette, and they're considered proto-carnivorous because the water that collects in the base of the leaves, it's sort of like a primitive pitfall trap, but it's not the primary structure of those structures. The primary function of those structures is to catch water so that they can live in the treetops, in the canopy, and survive. And a few insects might fall in. There's no enzymes, there's no acids there to dissolve anything. So that's a number of other plants that are considered proto-carnivorous, like monkey flower and trigger plant. Some of the North American pitcher plants are actually quite hardy, unlike the tropical ones, and they can go down to minus 10 degrees Celsius. Don't ask me what that is in Fahrenheit, but that's 10 below freezing. And they can actually eat a lot of slugs and snails. So, that's exciting from an English gardener's perspective, because slugs and snails are the number one pests in an English garden. So that's exciting. 20% of their diet can be made up of mollusks. And there's even a plant in Brazil called Phylloxera, and that has an extra set of leaves that grow underground that are sticky. And these subterranean leaves are thought to trap nematodes, and they exude protein digesting enzymes, proteases, that decompose the nematode's body. So Phylloxera could be a good one if you're growing potatoes, because they could trap cyst nematodes that love to eat potatoes. And then another South American species is moth flower, and that's thought to attract moths. So if you're growing apples, it could potentially trap codling moth. There's all potential for carnivorous plants beyond just growing them for ornamentals and for pure curiosity. So the question then is, with all these amazing traps, do carnivorous plants get attacked by pests? And yes, they do. Unfortunately, you're still going to get pests on your carnivorous plants. You're still going to get insect pests. So as many sundews are attacked by moths, plume moths, caterpillars, and they first eat the sticky traps in one area and then negotiate their way around the leaves to feed on the photosynthetic tissues. And so that's not cool, is it? So you don't want plume moths, caterpillars, and they possess specialist skin cells that are designed to be pulled off should the caterpillar get ensnared on the traps. So yeah, you need to look out for caterpillars if you're growing carnivorous sundew plants. Probably fungus gnats as well. You're probably going to get loads of fungus gnats, probably too many that the plants can't eat them, because you just got damp, acidic, decomposing, boggy grow media. Propagating carnivorous plants is in some ways very similar to normal plants. You can get seeds from those flowers that turn into fruits on the spikes above them. However, a lot also propagate by something called vivipary, where little plantlets appear on the end of the leaves, and you can just pull those off and you get new plants. So vivipary. Not many hydroponic crops are viviparous. Micropropagation is the way that most of them are produced commercially, because it's a lot easier to produce multiple plants in that way. Similar to orchids and bromeliads. It's the number one way of propagating them. And as I said, too much fertilizer can be bad for the carnivorous plants. It might be just toxic to them, or it can actually turn them vegetarian. If they get all the nitrogen they require from the fertilizer, they'd stop producing the traps as in such a great details, and things like Venus flytraps or the sundews can stop responding and using energy to try and trap things. The pitchers might dry up because they just don't need to waste energy getting any more nitrogen. So you can turn your carnivorous plants vegetarian by feeding them too much. That's been what I think is a very interesting topic. I hope you did too. If you thought it was interesting, please share it with someone who likes carnivorous plants. And if you had this episode shared, then you owe that person who shared it with you a beer. So take them down the pub, or if you don't drink alcohol, you owe them a Fanta lemon. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. Until tomorrow, goodbye.